Good afternoon. I'm Larry Hamilton. Today's date is 7/3/2015. It's just the day before the 4th of July, Independence Day, and I am at the home of Arthur Thomas. Art Thomas was my mentor in involving me in the quest for genealogy and family history research, and just decided to interview Art in connection with some of the things that were going on in Piqua. And as I came, he made mention of the fact that a lot of the old landmarks in Piqua that he was associated are no longer there, and there's been a whittling away of many of the things that he grew up and was accustomed to in his youth in Piqua. So, Art, I don't know what will. Let me just give you free will and liberty to say anything and everything in way of introductory comments that you'd like to make in connection with where we will be going. So, anything that you'd like to share with me and posterity or anybody else that might be interested in taking a look at this videotapes at some point in time in the future.
Okay. Larry, as we were speaking earlier about the landmarks in Piqua that I'm familiar with being erased, which is my history of Piqua, we can start in the beginning. I was born at Piqua Memorial Hospital there on Nicklin Avenue, which is now a middle school.
Yeah, Piqua Central Intermediate.
And I attended Spring Street Elementary School on the corner of Spring Street and what is that, Wayne or Ash, where the bank is, leading toward Old Works Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Spring Street Elementary's gone. That's where I attended elementary school, and then my high school, the old Piqua Central, is now a senior citizens residency, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
So all of, I guess you're erasing Art Thomas from Piqua's history.
Yeah, I guess that's the cost of progress.
That's the cost of progress.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have fond memories of growing up in Piqua and attending Spring Street Elementary School, and I went to Wilder Junior High there on Nicklin, which I guess they're going to do away with it if they haven't already done away with that building. And then Piqua Central there, played ball at Wirtz Stadium and basketball in the old field house. Ran track on that old cinder track. So yeah, a lot of fond memories of Piqua.
Okay. In the past, it's worth noting that this is the second what could potentially be an extensive interview or series with Art Thomas. We had engaged in an oral history interview several years
ago, correct?
And it was rather extensive and very rewarding because just didn't know the rich life experiences that my mentor had encountered in his younger years, particularly the service years and the college years during or prior to Central State University and growing up in Piqua in general. So this is another interview. And what really prompted this interview was something that I had read concerning the Johnston farm. And those of you who know that I have been long talking about a personal vision for Piqua know that I had done a presentation in connection with the AAGGMV back in 2006. And of course, Art Thomas was present at that presentation, and of course was also a founding member of the African American Genealogy Group of the Miami Valley. So Art was very much aware of the history of Piqua, particularly in association with the subject of that 2006 presentation, which was the Randolph freedmen, the Randolph people. And it was in that presentation that we provided a general cursory look at the history of the Randolph people, and in association with having come to the upper Miami Valley. And we at some point in time made mention of the Johnston farm because at that particular time the African American Genealogy Group had come to Piqua to take a canal boat ride at Johnston Farm, and I think we also were attending the Rossville Freedom Days.
Freedom Days at Helen's place.
Yes, at Helen Gilmore's place. So we were killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, here. But this interview that I'm initiating here revolves around something that was sent to me by way of email. It was a flyer, and it was also talking about the Johnston farm. And one of the things that I have always advocated in connection with Piqua, and particularly in association with issues of diversity and inclusion, has been to make an effort on the part of the wider community to embrace a more inclusive heritage. And I received a flyer or email from the Friends of the Johnston Farm. I think that's the title, or the group that is trying to promote the Johnston Farm as a major attraction, tourist attraction for Piqua. And one part of the flyer involved a reference to 1846. And as I read the flyer, it was referencing 1846 in connection with the expulsion of the local Indian population, which I found interesting because the same year, 1846, was also the year of the arrival of the Randolph freedmen. And that story is also one of ethnic cleansing or expulsion, if you will, particularly from New Bremen and the Mercer County, Carthagena area. So I thought that there was a tie in terms of what could be a more inclusive kind of historical perspective with the African American community in association with the Johnston Farm as well. And in talking with Art Thomas, he had an interesting family story that also was kind of a means by which we could promote this greater inclusive heritage in sharing stories associated not only with the native population, but also with the African American population. So I'm going to be quiet for a little while and allow Art to kind of share or preface in any way he desires a part of his family history story, and you can be as specific, or if you can provide documentary kind of evidence associated with the story, that might be helpful as well. But Art, tell us about your family history and how it could be a tie into telling a wider story in association with an exclusive heritage connected to the Johnston farm.
Okay, well, in my ancestral lines, we have documented our family being in Ohio. Well, we're the first families of Ohio in the Ohio Genealogical Society. I have proved that my family was in, or a family line was in Ohio prior to 1820. And they came into Ohio officially in 1813. But the interesting thing is the mother of the third great grandmother of whose family settled in Ohio in 1813, documented in the Draper manuscripts, was born in Blue Jackets Town in Logan County, Ohio in 1780. And this was as a result of the skirmishes on the western frontier during the Revolutionary War, when the British and the Shawnee in particular were raiding the settlements in southern Ohio and Kentucky. I have ancestors who were captured in the raid of Martin Station, Kentucky, who were brought from Kentucky to Detroit, and the fourth great grandmother, Rachel Reno, spelled R-E-N-O but pronounced Reno, was born in Blue Jackets Town. And I found an interview of her in the Lyman C. Draper manuscripts, and the connection that Larry is speaking of to Piqua and the Native American scene is in this interview. She relates her personal knowledge of Chief Blue Jacket, Simon Kenton, and Simon Girty, and she mentions that Colonel Alexander McKee, who she went to live with after the Martin Station's raid, had connections with Colonel Johnston of the Johnston farm, and Chief Blue Jacket's son, George Blue Jacket, was a student at one time of a school run by Colonel Johnston. Now this would have been in the late 1700s, early 1800s possibly. And it was interesting, this interview, and she mentioned Blue Jacket's son George. Well, a continuation of that story is the descendants of George Blue Jacket through this recent DNA testing scenario were DNA tested to prove that Blue Jacket, Chief Blue Jacket, was a Native American rather than Marmaduke Van Swearingen, who the outdoor drama in Xenia, Blue Jacket, was written about, and Marmaduke Van Swearingen being captured by Indians and was adopted by them and grew up with the Shawnee, and he eventually became Chief Blue Jacket. Well, George Blue Jacket's, the descendants of George Blue Jacket's DNA reveals that Blue Jacket himself was of Native American ancestry and not that of Marmaduke Van Swearingen. I thought that was just an interesting connection between some of my family history and Larry's interest in the Johnston farm and the interplay between the Johnstons, the Miami-Erie Canal, the bringing of the barges that carried the Randolph slaves up through Piqua and through the locks there on their way up to New Bremen, and then eventually back into Miami County in the area called Rossville, which is in Spring Creek Township. And if I'm not mistaken, the Johnston farm may be in Spring Creek Township, or at least it abuts Springfield Township in that Rossville area, that northeastern, western section of Piqua. So it's just very interesting how when you get beneath the surface and you're dealing with your family history, how it may possibly connect to some deeper history of the community that you were born in and raised in and grew up in and never really knew of or made these connections until you really start to researching your family history and you get back in those time frames. And the Randolph Friedman connection, growing up in Piqua, I had heard of the Randolph slaves and had, well, it frankly had a negative connotation at that time. And I didn't think that I had any association, or any of my friends had any associations to the Randolph slaves, now freedmen. And when we get into this history and studying these families, I don't know of any families that I grew up with in Piqua that had been there any length of time that did not have a familiar connection to the Randolph freedmen. I mean, I have Ohio documented in First Families, one of their daughters in Concord Township in Champaign County, Ohio, married a young man, Patrick Jones, who was number 297 on the Randolph Freedman Register. He was located in Elizabeth Township, right outside of Troy, and shows you how how close these families were living together, even though separate counties. But in reality, they were within probably 5 or 10 miles of each other in Elizabeth Township, in Miami County, in Concord Township, in Champaign County. And my one of my third great grandfather's daughter, Susan Adams, married Patrick Jones in 1850 something. They're in Troy or in Miami County. So that is one of my connections to the Randolph Freedmen, and another one of my several connections to the Randolph Freedmen. Is that going where you?
Yeah, it seems as if, well, let me look at one of the things that you mentioned a little earlier was the fact that in your youth you were aware of the reference to Randolph slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Later, of course, being the historian you are, you recognize that they were freedmen.
Mm-hmm.
But as you were saying in your youth, the references or the study or recognition of the Randolphs was negative.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have tried to promote in the way of my personal vision for Piqua and a more inclusive heritage was the phrase, it's important for people to know not only who they are, but whose they are.
Mm-hmm.
Now that first part, who they are, is in connection with the stories associated with their ancestry. And you have undertaken a great deal of research because of your, collateral kinds of family relationships to the Randolphs. And I don't think we can, talk enough about that history because many people that you grew up with and subsequent generations are lacking in a knowledge of who they are. So could you help expand the knowledge of or shine additional light about the Randolph story for the benefit of those who haven't developed a positive acknowledgement of their ancestry and family story?
Well, one of the things that really dawned on me when I became more deeply involved in looking at the history surrounding the freedom of the Randolphs was the fact that they were actually freed in 1833 upon the death of John Randolph. His will declared them to be free in 1833, and this is approximately 400 to 500 individuals being freed. And the families of John Randolph, who was a bachelor, believed that he had to be insane to be freeing 400 to 500 people at one time. This is a fortune. So they contested his will of 1833, which was finally resolved in 1846 when the 380 plus former Randolph slaves were finally freed and made their way into Ohio. Now you have to recognize that they were being freed from the Randolph plantation, the Roanoke plantation of John Randolph in Charlotte County, Virginia. Okay? Now, however many, I forget the exact number, but however many acres of land that consisted of, and the buildings and the whatever, the community of the Roanoke plantation was run and operated by these people called slaves.
I think it was over 8,000 acres.
Okay, so the homes that were built, the tools that were used, the farm equipment was probably built and manufactured by these enslaved persons on this Randolph plantation. And they had a pecking order, if you will, of who was responsible for what activities went on within this community. Now all of a sudden these people are freed and they come to Ohio and they're looked upon as I don't want to say ignorant, but not educated, illiterate, and non-skilled, yet they had run these plantations for this particular Randolph family for generations. So when they came into our part of Ohio, they brought skills with them. And they soon became a valuable asset to the surrounding community as not only as just laborers, but as skilled craftsmen, carpenters, brick mason, iron workers. The women were skilled in the domestic skills and operating a family and a household. So these weren't ignorant people at the mercy of their neighbors. They brought something to the community. And once you look at some of the children of that initial group and grandchildren and what have you, and what they have done in the community of the Upper Miami Valley, the successes that they have had, you can see what kind of stock was among these 380 plus people that were called the Randolph slaves. And this was, upon learning this history, I really became, and still am, somewhat ashamed of myself to have thought of them in that negative of a manner as I was growing up. But I was taught, as most of us were at that point in time, that slaves were just unskilled people, and they were just a little bit above the livestock, which was part of the chattel property of the slave owner. That their lives weren't that meaningful. They had nothing to contribute except to the wealth of the slave owner, and that's. I'm ashamed of myself for having that vision growing up, or growing up with that vision. But that's part of the
miseducation.
The miseducation. of my generation and that time, I don't recall ever having a lesson at any level in school on slavery as such, and certainly nothing that dealt with the history of the Randolphs right there in my community.
Well, now, you went on, of course, to become, to display a considerable expertise. We won't necessarily, burden you with the expert.
No, don't do that.
But
No, don't do that.
you went on to display a considerable expertise in your research, and you composed a great deal of documentation associated with the Randolph freedmen, and that research is available and on display at the local history library in Pickwick. And I was blessed to be the beneficiary of your work, and felt as if it needed to be more accessible to a wider viewing and a desire on the part of the people to have access to your research.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to probe you a little bit further, particularly in uncovering a little bit more of the knowledge associated with the Randolphs, and the reason why they came to specifically, or at least the desired destination became Mercer County, Ohio. Why was it that that was the area of settlement chosen for the Randolph people?
Okay, well, as I understand it now, and did not know that when the Randolphs came into Mercer County, that there already existed a sizable settlement of persons of color in Mercer County. And these came about through the Augustus Waddles Community and Settlement there in Mercer County. And I believe, I don't know where it is written as such, but I believe one of the reasons why the residents of Mercer County didn't want this influx of almost 400 more blacks coming into the community as free people is that there may have been a political power play just through sheer numbers. I'm sure that had some bearing. We've got enough of these folks in our community already. We sure don't need 400 more of them. But I think that was one of the reasons why the executors of the Randolph will sought out land for his former slaves to settle on was in this area of Ohio, which already had a sizable community of persons of color who seemingly got along. Is that?
Yeah, that was the area even had an African designation or label or identity because it was referred to as Carthagena. And I believe that it was named after the North African city-state that was a bone in the throat of the Roman Empire.
Okay.
And that city-state, of course, was Carthage. And so we also know that, as you mentioned earlier, that not only was it a numbers thing in terms of representing a political power play in association with the existing dominant white population. But there was always an element of fear. There always seemingly is. And the fear not only evolved from the politics of the large numbers of blacks coming into the territory, but an economic fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you mentioned, these were people who possessed skills.
Mm-hmm.
And their labor was such that they worked hard, and the existing population knew that because of their hard work, because of the skills that they possess within the agrarian economy, that they might drive down labor costs and wages on the part of the existing population, because they were willing to work hard, had as much or greater knowledge and expertise than the existing population, and because of that, there was a great fear that they would drive down wages on the part of the migrant population of Europeans who were coming into that area as well.
Mm-hmm. And another thought that just occurred to me is when you look at the time frame 1846, the 1840s through the 1850s, there was an increasing number of free persons of color settling in this entire area of west central Ohio. There was already the group there in Mercer County. You had the group in Darke County, Longtown. As I mentioned, my folks out in Champaign County, there was a sizable number of free persons of color in Champaign County, and in Logan County. There seemed to be just an influx of free persons of color coming into this area in west central Ohio. Now, it may be due to the Quaker influence. It may be due to this land was part of the Virginia Military District, and Revolutionary War soldiers from Virginia and parts of North Carolina had bounty land in this area called the Virginia Military District, which the Quakers and others were able to buy into and settle this land. But there was a lot going on insofar as free persons of color is concerned in the area of west central Ohio, not just Mercer County in the 1840s and 1850s. And so
And there was one other, and I think that this community also is perhaps associated with some of your family members that I don't think I heard you mention.